Hi everybody, welcome back to our study of the Augsburg Confession. We are on page 21 of your Blue Book of Concord, and we're looking at Article 27 of Monastic Vows. That's page 21, Article 27 of Monastic Vows. And again, like we did with the last article, this one is rather lengthy, so we're going to be skipping around a little bit, and we'll do our best to let you know what we're doing. It starts off here talking about how monasteries came to be. What is taught on our part concerning monastic vows will be better understood if it be remembered what has been the state of the monasteries and how things were daily done in those very monasteries, contrary to the canons. In Augustine's time, they were free associations. Afterward, when discipline was corrupted, vows were everywhere added for the purpose of restoring discipline, as in a carefully planned prison. Originally, monasticism started out in the Egyptian desert, probably in the 300s, and it was Christians wanting to flee the wicked world, to go out into the wilderness, and there to study the scriptures and whatnot. Throughout the ages, though, the monastery system, as Melanchthon writes here, became corrupted because there was throughout the years there became no discipline in this. And so when they talk about vows, we're talking about particularly three vows: the vow of poverty, the vow of chastity, and the vow of obedience. The vow of obedience is the vow, or is the obedience rendered to your superior there in the monastery then. So they exacted these vows from people, and in fact, if we go to the next paragraph here, gradually many other observances were added besides the vows, and these fettered were laid upon many before the lawful age, contrary to the canons. And then the next paragraph starts to go into this, that even youths were conscripted into the monasteries. That's probably not the right word. They willfully entered the monastery before they were really of age to make these sorts of decisions about their life. Now, if we go down to, in that second paragraph, to the very end, and it's the final two sentences in that paragraph, they taught that vows were equal to baptism. They taught that by this kind of life they merited forgiveness of sins and justification before God. Yea, they added that the monastic life not only merited righteousness before God, but even greater things, because it kept not only the precepts, but also the so-called evangelical counsels. This right here is the key issue that the Lutheran Church has with the idea of monasticism, that of men going off to monasteries and women going off to convents to become nuns then. And that is because in the medieval ages, and even still to this day, it is taught that entering into a monastery and living your life in that way is a holier station than living as a husband, as a wife, as a parent, as an employee, as an employer, as a citizen, etc. Then. So it was imagined, and still is, that if you want to live the super holy life, if you want to be the super Christian, have the real spiritual existence, you go to the monastery then. And this is why they say then that these vows were taught to be equal to baptism. And in some cases, they were taught to give even more grace than baptism. So people would enter a monastery to secure their everlasting life in the Middle Ages. People would enter the monastery so that according to those vows, the fulfillment of those vows, and also then by the strenuous, rigorous life of study, of chanting the Psalms on a daily basis, all these things, that they would merit justification for their sins. And not only that, but that they could do even better things, or merit even more things. In fact, at one point, Luther writes several times about how monks thought that they could sell their excess good works, their excess merit. So I've merited my own justification, and now I'm going to then start doling out and selling my merits then. And so all this is because they kept not only the precepts, but also the evangelical counsels. Now, if we continue, thus they made men believe that the profession of monasticism was far better than baptism, and that the monastic life was more meritorious than that of magistrates, than the life of pastors and such like, who serve their calling in accordance with God's commands without any man-made services. And that's really the core of this, is monasticism is a man-made work. Nowhere in Scripture do we have the command that you're to go off into the desert or into the monastery and shield yourself from the world. I think everyone, Christians, have this desire to be apart from the world. When we see, all you got to do is turn on the television and just see, I want to protect my family from the world and whatnot. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you take it to the extent of monasticism, of I'm actually going to leave my family, I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to take care of all of my responsibilities and my vocations, and I'm going to jettison them for the sake of doing nothing but reading the scripture, praying the canonical hours, doing all of these man-made works, then that's when it becomes sinful then. And so what they were teaching was that this monasticism, this life, with all of its rigors, with all of its man-made works of devotion and disciplines and these sorts of things, that was the perfect life. In fact, there, if you go to the first full paragraph on the top of page 21 on the right-hand column, it says there, "Yea, they preach that it is a state of perfection, and they put it far above all other kinds of life ordained of God." So this is the problem with monasticism. It makes man-made works replaces those as the spiritual life of the Christian. Now, flip to page 22 and go down to the third full paragraph. It starts, "But although it appears that God's command concerning marriage delivers many from their vows, yet our teachers introduce yet another argument concerning vows, into which they are now void. For every service of God, ordained and chosen of men, without the commandment of God to merit justification and grace, is wicked. As Christ says in Matthew 5:15-9, in vain do they worship me with the commandments of men." And Paul teaches everywhere that righteousness is not to be sought from our own observances and acts of worship devised by men, but that it comes by faith to those who believe that they are received into grace for Christ's sake. And so here you have the idea, or rather where monasticism bumps up against AC Article 4 with justification. Justification only happens by faith. The righteousness of faith, that is the Christian perfection. And then as one that is justified by faith, God doesn't pull us out of the world, but rather he puts us smack dab right back in the middle of a world. So husbands stay husbands, and wives stay wives, and parents stay parents, and we remain citizens. And so we're not to pull away from the world. That's not evangelical perfection, but rather it's the righteousness of faith, believing the gospel, and then our good works are not man-made good works like joining a monastery and living according to all of these different external disciplines as if they gained us justification, but instead it's living our life according to the Ten Commandments then. In fact, on the right-hand column there, right above where it says Concordia Triglata, page 83, "For the righteousness of faith, which chiefly ought to be taught in the church, is obscured when these wonderful angelic forms of worship with their show of poverty, humility, and celibacy are cast before the eyes of men." So it obscures justification. Now, keep going here. "Furthermore, the precepts of God and the true service of God are obscured when men hear that only monks are in a state of perfection." And asterisk this part here. "For Christian perfection is to fear God from the heart, and yet to conceive great faith, and to trust that for Christ's sake we have a God that has been reconciled, to ask of God, and assuredly to expect his aid in all things according to our calling are to be done. All things according to our calling are to be done, and meanwhile to be diligent in outward good works, and to serve our calling. In these things consists the true perfection and true service of God." And further down, almost towards the bottom of the page, he writes, "A good and perfect kind of life is that which has for it the commandment of God." And so the monastic life is not a holy life. In fact, it's a wicked life because you're trying to please God and you're trying to earn justification and grace and his favor by works that are devised by men. If you want to please God, it's simply faith, the righteousness of faith, and then good works which flow out of that faith. And it's like as he says there, continually going back to your calling, living according to the commandments, according to your calling as father, mother, parent, son, daughter, grandparent, retiree, employee, employer, citizen, whatever vocations you might have, God redeems us to put us back in those. And the good works that he wants us to do are good works according to the Ten Commandments, both the first table of fearing, loving, and trusting God, worshiping him, calling upon his name in true faith, but then also loving our neighbors within our vocations, within our callings, according to his law as well then. So that's the gist of Article 27. The righteousness of faith, that is the life of evangelical perfection, not a life of man-made works.